Welcome to Ink Odyssey.
A story is a journey. Becoming a storyteller is a journey all of its own. Let me share mine with you. I am Stephen McCumber, and I will be your navigator for this odyssey of becoming a storyteller. As storytellers, our job is to weave together a tale for our audience. Let us practice this, you and I. First, imagine some music, calm and low. Can't hear it? Try again. You stand on a galley's deck, your hand resting on the golden timber of a rail. The scroll sail billows in the wind. Oars of massive quills rise and fall into the swells of the light blue seas. The sun disappears behind clouds, taking its warmth with it, only to return before the chill wind can bite you too deep. There is no land in sight. All is right. All is well. Electricity shocks your hand away from the rail. You see nothing, just wood and no source of the shock. As your focus expands, you see the water shimmering with light, but not from the sun. It is a miniature lightning storm just beneath the water's surface, devoid of sound. The light vanishes as the sun brings its warmth. You glance up to see another cloud will cover up the sun in moments. As soon as clouds shroud the sun's light, the water erupts as mermaids jump into the air, singing and waving and laughing. Too rapt by the display, you cannot see the cloud shifting, and the mermaids dive deep before the light can touch them. It is some time before another cloud is moving to cover the sun, but you await it, wondering what will happen next. The water turns to diamonds, yet swells shatter into foam against our hull. A turtle with a fin bigger than our entire galley rises from the sea. You can sense it, that tonight will not be an ordinary night. There will be no sleep in it, not for you, but you don't mind, for it will be a magical night carried with you for the rest of your days. Can you see it? Are you with me? Good. Get comfortable and let's talk.
Fantasy as a genre.
The tricky thing with language is that the same word can have several meanings. The reason genre gets debated so much is that most try to lump all the meanings together into a singular and distinct word. That doesn't work. I'll go over this more in its own episode, but for now, know that there are distinct definitions for genre that we need to be aware of as writers. Fantasy is a field that needs addressing, and right now is the time for it.
Vestigial craft.
I have a theory concerning fantasy. First, we need to find some common ground to move forward on. When I say fantasy, I'm talking about high fantasy, fiction concerning worlds completely removed from our own. There is a distinct difference between fairy tales, folk tales, urban fantasy, alternate worlds, and many settings that fall under the umbrella of fantasy. What I'm here to talk to you about are stories that take place in a different reality on a different world. They might have different physical laws, they have magic, they have their own histories and religions, and, well, a lot of what our world has and more. The thing that separates high fantasy from fairy tales is concrete laws which reality operates on. A world of high fantasy has rules. The reader may not know them all, shouldn't know them all, but the writer better know what's possible and not possible. Fairy tales run on whimsy and have absolutely no boundaries, which is great, but it's better left for children's books. High fantasy is a literature that's only been around for a few hundred years. People may argue that things like the Arabian Nights or Gilgamesh or any other number of fantastical tales are high fantasy, but they really aren't. They don't have those concrete laws of reality. One of the most well-known pieces of high fantasy is J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. Have you ever read Shakespeare in its original form? If you have and you don't have training in classical literature, I'll bet it sounds like a lot of gibberish. This isn't surprising or anything to be ashamed of, because the simple truth is language changes and evolves. The meanings and sounds of words change, the structure of our sentences change, words get combined into new ones and old ones disappear. A culture with a written language is slower to change, but the change comes all the same. That is why reading Shakespeare is so hard for so many. It's an archaic form of English. Our language isn't the only thing that changes over the centuries. Have you ever read older literature? Let's keep it to the work in the 1800s. Titles like The Count of Monte Cristo, Les Miserables, or Great Expectations. If you have, you'll know what I mean when I say they are archaic forms of storytelling. Les Mis begins with tens of thousands of words talking about the priest who lets our hero go after committing a crime against him. The Count of Monte Cristo does the same when our hero listens to a story of someone who was witness to an incident that could be of importance to Edmond Dantes. The reasoning isn't so difficult to understand. The light bulb wasn't invented until the latter half of the 1800s. Color photographs weren't common until the mid-1900s. There certainly weren't things like airplanes for safe and fast travel, televisions or phones or the internet. I know this is obvious, but those inventions impact our lives. As a result, we can see more of the world with more ease. With CGI, we can make the impossible look real. Not only that, but our lives are getting busier and busier, leaving us less and less time to indulge in entertainment. This doesn't even factor in the vast quantity of cheap entertainment available to us in today's age. My point is this. Writing from a few centuries ago had to fulfill several functions. One is it had to describe things to people who had no frame of reference for things outside of their corner of the world. Another is that people had fewer sources of entertainment, so lengthy work that took a long time to read was a welcome distraction. High fantasy introduced people to an entirely unknown world with new laws of reality and a history no one knew of and folktales that had never been told. Yet this field of literature is young enough that we can still comprehend the pioneering work in high fantasy with relative ease. Now we get to my theory. Those original works hold a significant influence on the genre of fantasy as it is today. The result is that a lot of modern stories use archaic forms of storytelling. Why do authors use it? Well, because it's part of the genre, isn't it? No. It's a remnant of older storytelling that was still in standard literature at the time of high fantasy's creation. Fantasy as a genre is shooting itself in the foot. The only reason I can think of that keeps this older style of storytelling alive in fantasy is because readers still get inspiration from those older works. There's enough done in this style in modern fantasy it continues to be viewed as an intrinsic part of the genre. A part that deters those who aren't avid fantasy fans. I say this because I love fantasy books, I really do. I've read so many of them. However, that could be cut in half if they just removed the stories within a story. Companions travel on a road and tell each other folktales and mythology and history and on and on and on, and none of it is important to the core story, arc, or character growth. There's an attempt at poetically descriptive language to describe something people don't need help to visualize. There's not a single genre out there that I've read that goes into as much tangential drivel as fantasy does. Fantasy readers are fiercely loyal to the genre. That's because fantasy delivers wonder and adventure like no other genre can. It's why I love it. Science fiction comes the closest, but it has a different feel to it. Fantasy is nostalgic for a life before the troubles of the modern era, while sci-fi hopes that we'll get past it and improve upon it, barring dystopias, but even those are inherently optimistic because humanity isn't extinct. We need to identify two types of high fantasy, classical and modern. The classical can have all the tangential, lengthy, roundabout ways of getting from beginning to end as it wants. Modern styles need to have all of that removed. The reasoning is simple. Those who love fantasy will read both, but will go into it knowing what to expect. The modern style will bring new readers into the genre. something it desperately needs if we as writers want to see it grow and thrive among a broader audience. The truth of the situation is this. Readers who read anything and everything but fantasy are used to a more streamlined story. Going from something that cut out as much excess as it could to something that indulges in excess isn't fun for today's average reader. So if you write fantasy, or want to write fantasy, be aware of the stigma against the genre. Know if you want to tell a more classical form or a more modern form, and be sure to tell your reader which to expect. Besides, those who love your story will love any extras you have. Save those folktales and mythology and bits of history as bonus content for the truly ravenous fans. Start a Patreon account and have them subscribe to get all that information, or just have it up on your website if you don't want to use Patreon.
Modern fantasy.
When you write your fantasy book, never forget this one fact. Your reader is going into your story expecting the strange and unfamiliar. They are ready to completely suspend their disbelief and allow you to install a new reality in their mind. We allow fantasy writers a spectacular amount of room to present their imagined reality. Treat that gift with respect. Treat your reader as an intelligent human being capable of accepting what they see without needing to know every facet of its construction. They trust you know what you're doing, so make sure you understand your world when you present it to them. Always remember, this is fantasy. The fantastic and whimsical and magical and impossible are exactly what your reader wants. Your job is to deliver that world through your characters. Your characters are the beating heart of your story. They must appear authentic. They must appear complex and deep. They must be a product of their world. They must understand their world. They must be the bridge between your reader and your engineered world. If something is commonplace for your character, don't describe it as if it isn't. Don't tell stories they've heard 1,000 times. Don't give history lessons to tell why something is the way it is. I understand this is challenging. As a fantasy writer, I spend a great deal of time building my world and creating those histories and grand things that are amazing and impossible. For our characters, that's a Tuesday. The fantasy element of your world should be at the heart of your story. Something that isn't in our world should be the driving force of your story. Otherwise, why are you telling a story in a fantasy setting? A few fictitious examples for you. 2 stories. One is a grand adventure where the fate of the world is at stake. The other is a simple revenge story. In our grand adventure, we go to unknown places, see many interesting things, encounter beings, places, objects, and whatever you can dream up that your character isn't familiar with. In this kind of story, you can go into detail about the little nuances and history and such, but what you tell the reader must be crucial to the development and understanding of the story. An ancient entity will arise and devour the world. Well, that's the heart of your story problem, isn't it? The goal is to keep that entity asleep or defeat it. The journey is discovering the entity's existence and how to make the goal a reality. You can go into in-depth details as your character uncovers this information for themselves, but again, it must be critical to the story. Our story of revenge takes place in the city our hero resides in. Perhaps a magic user or being not native to our world killed our hero's spouse. There is no way of legal recourse. There's not even a practical way for our hero to get vengeance by simple murder. The story is one of revenge. The setting isn't new or wondrous to our character. The resulting story would be a sleek and trim tale of an individual getting back at something that is the extraordinary element at the heart of our story. Not much will exist in the area that will make them stop and gaze in wonder, because again, it's just a Tuesday for them. Your goal as the writer, my goal, is to know when to write in depth about something of this imagined reality and when to just mention it and move on. That's our job as the writer, to tell a story that will excite and know what's necessary and remove what isn't. If you want to tell a giant 500,000 word story, go ahead. Just be sure that the story actually needs all 500,000 words.
fantasy advice.
A common beginning exists for a lot of fantasy. A young person from some small corner of the world becomes the chosen one and is the only person who can defeat whatever threat faces the world. Why is understandable. 1. This chosen one concept ensures that our character of choice is the one and only person in all existence who can eliminate the threat. 2. This person, being young and inexperienced and from a small corner of the world, gives the writer the room to explain absolutely everything they want in as much detail as they want. The problem is, this gets used a lot because it's a convenient way to deliver the story in a fantasy setting. The character knows nothing, so we can treat them as our reader and explain everything we think they need to know. Several problems exist with this approach. It treats our reader as less than intelligent and closed off to what we present. It also leads to a character with no experience or training or any number of things into a confrontation with something or someone that should by all rights destroy them with ease. This can also lead to someone becoming enormously powerful because, well, they have to be. If they don't become powerful, then blind luck sees them through. The Chosen One also propagates an idea that destiny is king and that only one person can rise to the occasion, which isn't a lesson we should try to teach people. That's another conversation, however. One last major problem is that it's done far too often and typically leads a story to become a YA novel. I have nothing against YA novels, but we need adult fantasy as well. When telling a fantasy story, don't look for the chosen one. Look for who is in a position to do something about it. That position may be their political standing, their training, their profession, their lineage, which isn't to be confused with the chosen one. Their placement in the story might be that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time and fell into a hole. To really nail down this approach, it is critical to do some world building. Fortunately, I'm quite skilled at world building and can help you through that process. When telling a story in a world of fantasy, in particular telling a story for adults where we don't want to spoon-feed our readers, there are good examples out there. I'll use the video game Horizon Zero Dawn as an example. Why? Because I adore this game. It isn't high fantasy, but the world is such that it serves my purpose. Plus, you can look up YouTube videos for some visuals. The hero of our story, the character we play, is a woman named Aloy. The beginning of the game is a tutorial where our hero is a young girl and she's being taught how to survive by her guardian. We learn that the common weapons are a spear and a bow, yet the foes of the game are highly advanced robots that look like animals. The game doesn't explain a thing about how those machines work, or why they exist, or why humanity lives in a primitive state full of superstition and fear without industry to aid them. That's how you present a story in a fantasy world, as it is to those who live in it. You don't have to explain a thing to your reader about the why of anything. They're reading your story for that strange and mysterious quality. Now, the story of the game is the machines are becoming more dangerous and questions and events arise that are troubling to our character. They need answers, so their journey begins. It just so happens that their journey involves uncovering the truth of the world and why it is the way it is. It's a fun and fascinating journey. The thing is, however, that the why of the world and those questions and events are all connected. One thing leads to another and we uncover piece by piece alongside the character. You don't have to have some big mystery in your story that explains the state of the world, but it's an example of how to do so. The key takeaway from this is that you don't have to explain anything. Show your world as it is, like it's the world your character interacts with every day. Because it is. This kind of storytelling allows your reader to enjoy a world where the fantastic is mundane and the journey is about the emotional journey of our character. If that journey includes things that are extraordinary even for your character, all the better. Never forget, the purpose of storytelling in a fantasy world is to allow our audience to settle into a place and life not their own, where there isn't a single reminder of their life or the struggles of the actual world. Things like politics, war, loss, famine, pain, and all those troubles we experience in life will still be present, but they're disconnected from reality in a way that allows a reader to escape their own suffering no matter what it is they're suffering from. Sometimes all we need is a break from the world we live in. Nothing, and I mean nothing, delivers that as well as fantasy. I love fantasy. I want more of it. I want more that respects my time and purpose for reading it. I want to see fantasy thrive in cinema, TV, games, and books. For that to happen, the genre needs to address some internal issues that are keeping a broader audience at bay.
Farewell.
Unfortunately, today's voyage is over. For those of you who know my partings well, I bid you a fond farewell. Until you journey with me again, go turn your ideas into ink. If you wish to learn more about me, support me, connect, or see a catalog of what I have available, please visit macumberworkshop.com. You can email me at steven@macumberworkshop.com. For social media, look for Stephen Macumber or SDW Macumber. Follow me on Instagram for some quick tips plus other content, and follow me on Twitter for updates. If you want to support the show and myself, please tell a friend and share your favorite episodes. If you would like to become a patron, please visit patreon.com/SDWMacumber. Even if it's $1, that's another dollar that will allow me to live my dream and support my family, and I will be grateful. Patrons get a host of perks including short stories and their audio versions, ebooks, template files, ad-free videos, access to everything I did in creating old projects, and sneak peek progress videos of my current works. Thank you for joining me. Until we meet for another voyage, go turn your ideas into ink.